All right, our third and final panelist is James Taylor, Juris Doctorate. He is a Senior Fellow for Environment Policy at the Heartland Institute, based here in Illinois. He is Managing Editor of Environment and Climate News, a monthly newspaper reporting on the latest scientific, economic, and public policy developments regarding energy and environmental issues. Taylor is also a columnist for Forbes.com. I've read your stuff many times, James. Taylor has presented energy and environment analysis for the CBS Evening News, ABC World News, PBS NewsHour, CNN Headline News, Fox News Channel, MSNBC, numerous national radio programs, and in virtually every major newspaper in the country. Taylor received his bachelor's degree from Dartmouth College and his JD from Syracuse University. James Taylor, ladies and gentlemen.
Well, thank you, Mike, and thank you all for being here. If we're going to talk about President Obama's failed energy policy, we have to keep this first principle firmly in our mind at all times. We are an energy-rich nation. We may be behaving like an energy-poor nation, but we are, in fact, an energy-rich nation. And we should remember that every time the topic of energy comes up in the political discussion. Now, first of all, let's take a look at what we have as a nation in terms of our resources. Oil. We often hear about how we have to import oil from the Middle East, how we have to bow down and kiss the Saudi ring, etc. But we do not need to be importing oil. We don't have to. It's a political choice we made. At worst, we have the 6th greatest oil reserves in the world. At worst. We're most likely in the top 4. Now, let's move down the list. Natural gas. At worst, we have the 3rd most natural gas reserves in the world. We're most likely 1 or 2. When I say most likely, because the federal government does not even allow companies to see what energy resources we have on much of federal lands. And then third, regarding coal, without doubt, we have the most coal reserves in the world. When you put those 3 together, oil, natural gas, and coal, the United States has more than twice as much natural resources than every other nation in the world with the exception of Russia. We're still number 1. Russia has more than half of what we have. No other nation on earth has even half as much of our natural resources. And yet, we are behaving like an energy-poor nation. It makes no sense. It's occurring solely because of poor political choices. Now, let's move on down the list. Next, we know what we have. So how is the Obama administration governing this? Well, as David pointed out, the Obama administration is shutting down production on federal lands. First of all, let's take a look at what the government does and does not allow. 60% of federal lands are currently entirely off limits for energy production. 60%. Another 30% are severely restricted with special restrictions that apply to energy production that for all practical purposes render them off limits. Only 10% of our federal lands, 10%, that's it, have a normal process for leasing, for producing oil, natural gas. 10%. That is the reason why we have to import so much as we do. Now, what has the Obama administration done? Beyond what David said in terms of reducing the number of leases, even from those numbers that I just quoted, he shut down coal use. The Obama administration, the Obama EPA, has just passed regulations that make it impossible to ever build a new coal-fired power plant in our nation ever again. Coal power is far and away our least expensive source of electricity. These new rules are going to, as a matter of unavoidable reality, raise our electricity prices across the board. And again, we're placing our coal resources off limits, even though we are number 1 in the world in terms of coal reserves. At the same time, the EPA, under the Obama administration, is imposing new restrictions. It is engaging in harassing enforcement actions against coal mining and coal production. So not only can't we use it, we're going to have a difficult time producing it and potentially exporting it, and then, of course, bringing in all the wealth that the exports would have. In addition to that, as David pointed out, the Obama administration is demonizing oil, and as Paul pointed out, shackling up our oil leases. We have much less access to oil than we did under the Bush administration. And finally, regarding natural gas, here we have the shale gas revolution that has occurred, whereas now we have, not only have we discovered, but through advances in shale gas technology, we can produce shale gas, natural gas at extremely affordable prices. But the Obama EPA is now investigating hydraulic fracturing, even though it's been done for decades without any documented case of groundwater pollution. The Obama EPA is doing its best to try to find such a case or drum up a case where none such exists. The result of this, again, would be to either shut down natural gas production or, at the very least, make it extremely expensive so that their preferred renewable sources, wind power, solar power, etc., might somehow become cost comparative because they're jacking up the prices of natural gas. So this is what the Obama administration has done in terms of rendering our resources off limits or making them incredibly expensive. Now, what are the consequences? It's really interesting. President Obama recently, he bragged about how now under his administration, we are now producing 50%, half of the oil we use. Well, the reason why we're producing half now is because, number one, many of the leases that were approved under the Bush administration, that the Obama administration would not approve today, they're finally coming online. So Obama's getting the benefit of the Bush policies, even though he's shutting down oil production for future years. And on top of that, as mentioned, the Bakken Shale Formation, a recent discovery in North Dakota, is primarily on private lands, so the federal government cannot shut it down. And the Bakken Formation, as a result of that, North Dakota right now, David mentioned the states that North Dakota has surpassed in terms of oil production. How about this one? North Dakota now produces more oil than the OPEC nation of Ecuador. North Dakota by itself. Now, the Bakken Shale Formation is a tremendous natural resource, but it's not the only one we have in our nation. We have other formations, primarily on federal lands, that can be doing this over and over and over again throughout our nation. Now, let's compare the Obama administration's vision versus that of North Dakota. The Obama administration, when President Obama first took office, held up Spain as an example that we should follow in terms of our energy policy. Spain engaged in a renewable energy policy, the green economy they called it. This was going to be the 21st century economy. What happened? After they initiated that, their unemployment rate tripled from 8% to 24%. Now, granted, the world has been in a recession for the past few years, but our unemployment rate has not tripled even under the Obama administration. Spain's unemployment rate has tripled. It's gotten so bad that the Spanish government has now said, we can't do this anymore. We're cutting off our subsidies. We're getting off this economy. That's what the Obama administration is taking us towards in smaller steps than Spain because we have checks and balances here, but that's their goal. That's their vision. That's what's happening right now. On the other hand, we have North Dakota. North Dakota, their unemployment rate, I mentioned how much oil they produce. As a result, their unemployment rate, 3.0%. That's full employment, 3.0%. Now, oftentimes the Obama administration or others would say, well, even if we allow more oil production, that's not going to make much of a difference at the pump because oil's a global market. Well, it's true, oil is a global market. But if you take the third or fourth most productive nation or the nation with the third or fourth most reserves off the market, there is a significant increase in gasoline prices. That's what we've done in the United States on a permanent basis. By making these resources available, yes, indeed, we will have a significant reduction in gasoline prices. But more importantly, it's not just the gasoline prices. Because when oil prices rise, and yes, indeed, oil is a global market, when oil prices rise, that means gasoline prices rise in North Dakota too. Do you think they are complaining with their 3.0% employment? When oil prices rise, they have more money coming into the state because they're exporting oil. They can deal with a little higher gasoline prices. That's why they have 3.0% unemployment, because oil is so valuable. When oil prices rise globally, do the people in Saudi Arabia pay more for their gasoline? Yes, they do. But are they complaining? No, they're not. Because they produce so much, they sell it, they bring wealth into the nation. That's what we can and should be doing as a nation. Number one, yes, we will be reducing gasoline prices, but number two, and more importantly, even if we weren't going to do so, we could have North Dakota-type economies throughout our nation. Our nation as a whole would become more like North Dakota, would become more like Texas. If you remember last summer when Rick Perry and Texas were brought into the political spotlight, the center of the spotlight, why did Rick Perry so quickly become a prominent presidential candidate? Because during our deep recession, almost half the jobs that were created in the nation were created in Texas. That's because Texas leads the nation in oil and natural gas production. We have two visions and two choices. We can be Spain, like the Obama administration wants us to be, or we can be North Dakota and we can be Texas. That's our choice, and that's why we need to remember every time the energy issue comes up, the Obama administration policies have failed because although we are acting like and people think we are an energy-poor nation, we are instead and indeed an energy-rich nation. Thank you very much.
James Taylor.